Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we are going to be getting a third-person camera set up like so that when we back into a wall, it is going to keep our character in view and not disappear within the wall. Let's dive in and see how this can be achieved in Unreal. Alrighty then, a third-person camera. How are we going to do this? Let's go and do this in Blueprint because there's really no point doing this in C++. It's all configuration. It's really much easier to do with scene components in Blueprint. So let's go to the BP shooter character, open the full Blueprint editor so we can see the viewport, so we can see all of the components over on the left. And what we're going to do is add in a little bit of a camera component. So go to Add Component, Camera, and the easiest way to get a third-person view is, and something that you probably already knew, just move this camera out and over the right shoulder or left shoulder, whichever way you want to, move it back, and you can go ahead and have a play, and that's going to be a third-person view, simple as. But things are not going to be that simple. For a start, you can see that our control rotation isn't entirely working. I can't go up and down. But also, if I back into a wall, you can see that I'm looking through the wall. That's no good, is it? So let's try and see if we can make this a little bit better. Now, Unreal has a component for this that makes using cameras in this way a lot better. But before we do that, I want us to go to the camera component and fix that rotation problem. So you can go to the camera options and check the pawn use control rotation. And what that's going to do is it's going to rotate the camera using the control rotation. Let's go ahead and hit play and see if that works. Yes, it does rotate, but unfortunately it rotates around the camera. That's not a very third-person-y look. You tend to expect it to rotate around that kind of point over the shoulder here so that you can always keep that character within view. Okay, enough teasing. What we want here is the spring arm component. So I'm going to select the capsule component, go to Add Component, because I want this to be a child of the capsule component, add a spring arm in here. For some reason, Unreal is focused on trying to put these components in my character's crotch. Now let's go to the camera and make the camera a child of the spring arm, and I'm going to just reset its location and transform location under the details pane, so that when we select the spring arm, you can see that the camera goes on the end of the spring arm. And then what I'm going to do is you could move the camera, but I'll show you why in a second that's not a good idea. We're going to move the spring arm instead, and because the camera is childed to the spring arm, it's moving with it. We're going to move that to, so there's this point just to the right of my character's mesh, the right of his shoulder, and that's what the camera is going to try and look at. So if we go ahead and hit play now, and move. The movement is still not quite right, but we should have fewer problems with the walls. You can see that now I can back into a wall and my camera doesn't go through the wall. That is the functioning of the spring arm itself. So, you know, when I went into camera and I set the use pawn control rotation checked, that we actually want to uncheck because it's not the camera that we want to rotate, but rather the spring arm. Because you can see that if I use my rotation widget, which I'm going to use E to switch over to my rotation widget, if I were to rotate the spring arm, you can see that I'd get the right sort of rotation. It wouldn't be just the camera looking up and down, because if I select the camera and rotate that, you can see the camera's just looking up and down, which is the behavior we were seeing. We want it pivoting around that spring arm. So what we can do is we can select the spring arm and go to use pawn control rotation on the spring arm itself. Now if we hit play and we move around, you can see, yes, that is much more like it. That is third-person camera at its finest. And you can see that we're able to move into walls, and that is no problem whatsoever. So I'd like you to run a little experiment as part of your learning here. We're going to try and figure out why not move the camera. Why did we move the spring arm and not the camera to get that third-person view? So try moving the camera and not the spring arm and see what happens. See if you can figure out why I did that. Pause the video and have a go. Okay, welcome back. So let's give this a shot. I am going to just go ahead and put our spring arm back in its original location just by resetting it and taking the camera instead, using the movement widget and bringing that up into a higher location, over, up and to the left. So the spring arm, you can see the little red line is pointing back here. The camera's up there and to the left. Go ahead and hit play in this configuration. Let's see if we can figure out, well, seems to be mostly working the same, doesn't it? Let's go and have a look, go near an edge of something and see if we can figure out what's going wrong. There you go. That is exactly an example of why we move the spring arm. Now, what's going on here is that little red line of the spring arm, this one here, that was in the clear. When we went through this doorway, it was kind of going through here. So it was going through the hallway just fine. The red line was clear. The camera wasn't clear. The camera was up somewhere inside the wall. So what we want to have happen is that this red line needs to be wherever we need to clear the view for the camera. And that's why we want the camera to always be looking down the red line. So if we reset it and go and have a look at our spring arm, you can see that now the red line's kind of pointing, firing out of the camera to the point of interest, which, as we said, Unreal's got a bit of an interesting point of interest. And in this case, it should be, just above the shoulder like this. And that's the point that we're going to want to go and get the camera to focus in on as much as possible. Now, this does have an interesting point, which is that we want to, if we wanted to, say, rotate this spring arm, you can't simply just go ahead and rotate the spring arm. That doesn't work. It seems to want to go straight out backwards. And the reason for this is it's in the settings of the spring arm itself. You can see that there is this socket offset, target offset, and spring arm length. So the length is telling us how long that length is. That kind of makes sense. But if you want to do a rotation type of thing, then you can use the offsets. There's no real kind of rotation going on here, but rather we're just kind of moving that camera over using the offsets. And then if you wanted to rotate the camera at all, you could rotate the camera independently so that if it was pointing more in towards the player, like so. And because we've still got that red line set up in the right way, the camera is going to work. It's going to keep our visibility clear towards the player as much as is physically possible. Now I'm just going to go ahead and tweak this more to my liking. So I'm going to move it a little bit closer to the shoulder here, because if I've got the camera coming in, I want it to almost be looking down the barrel of the gun. But then I don't want any rotation on the camera itself. I find that it's not really necessary. But I do want to have a bit of a spring arm offset so that we can get that camera looking over slightly more to the right when we are not near a wall. And as we get near a wall, it's going to look closer and closer to the player's shoulder. Let's play that, see how that feels. So that's looking like I'm a bit too far over to the right here. Let's bring it in again. I think about maybe 60 units would be good, like so, just to have a nice round number. I'm going to hit play, and you can see that's kind of in the right sort of spot for a third-person view, in my opinion. And if I go up against a wall, you can see it kind of brings me closer into the shoulder, so I can still keep an eye on my character. I'm probably going to have a gun barrel. This might need some more tweaking later on when we've got our animations in place and we actually want to be looking down the gun barrel when we zoom in. That's fine. We don't need to do that just yet. Okay, so hopefully you have got now a working knowledge of the spring arm and camera and how we can use those two components together to create a third-person camera. Now, all of that brings out the fact that our animations are not there. He's just standing in a static A pose. So in the next lecture, we're going to look at adding in those skeletal animations. See you there.